So Brian, we started out kind of at the very beginning talking a little bit about endpoint security.
Yeah.
Let's dig into it a little bit more. What are your observations about endpoint security?
I could fill up hours talking about endpoint.
Sure
So I spent my career on the endpoint. I actually went to Damballa to get away from the endpoint, believe it or not. And some of that was on the macro level was just, my history is building system level antivirus software on Windows.
Mm-hmm.
And back 7 years ago, 90% of your endpoints that IT managed in enterprise were Windows on Intel.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look today, that's 30 to 40%. Why?
Yeah.
Because of iPhones and because of Android, and even a resurgence of Mac OS, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And from a software development perspective, it's harder to do what we were doing on Wintel on those other platforms. In some cases, you can't. You can't do that on iOS, for example. And so just the ability to secure those devices and write the same kind of security software is harder. But then the core issue is then you also help from a business model perspective. You saw security software going to a free model. So long reason I thought network is where security is going to come from, and where I think you're going to get security. And so I came to Damballa, but as I keep very close to my largest customers, I keep hearing them say, I'm having to go back to the endpoint. Why? Because my employees are leaving my network and they're not always on my network. And although I control my network and I want to put security in my network, I still have to go secure these guys while they're out on the road and they're getting hacked on the road. And this came to mind, the reason why I brought this up for this session was we recently looked at our customers at Damballa and found when we find malicious files, we scan them with like 20 antivirus engines. And within an hour of us, the first hour of us detecting something, 70% of the antivirus solutions out there don't detect it.
Right.
And I think common sense would tell us, okay, we know that. Everybody's been saying AV's dead. If you're using it for prevention, you're doing it wrong, all those things. But what was surprising to me was that after a month, still 40% were missing it. It took a full 6 months before the full list of antivirus companies we're looking at were catching up with everything we're seeing.
Right.
So I go back and I say, on one hand, I hear, CISOs for very large companies saying, I'm having to go back to the endpoint. On the other hand, I'm here saying the top 20 antivirus companies aren't on the ball, And of course, the answer has been, if you go look at where there's a lot of innovation and there's a lot of investment in the market today, there's 10 new endpoint companies that have popped up with next-gen endpoint solutions. So it's just interesting. I have a lot of experience in this. I'm curious what you guys see and your perspectives on it. It seems to me that's McAfee and Symantec's, maybe Sophos and Kaspersky Trend in some cases, their markets to lose because they're there already, but they're not doing a good job. And you think it's been 10, 15 years that this issue has been becoming prevalent.
Yeah.
You think that by now they've done something.
I don't even know where to start on this because I think there are a lot of aspects of this that we could certainly discuss. One is that clearly the traditional signature-based analysis isn't working too well. That if you have to know about every piece of malware, it's a problem. And so if you look at some of the alternatives that are coming onto market, they're really looking at it in the inverted approach. That is, application whitelisting is sort of a way to look at it.
That's right.
So that when you see an application that you don't know about, you just kind of raise that as a flag or at least suspicious, and then you can kind of focus on what it's doing as a potential threat.
That's a good idea.
And so I think in the mobile space, because the application markets are so much better controlled, that is a much better opportunity. That is, you're looking for the unusual anomaly as opposed to the onslaught of so many different new versions of malware that are coming on. So I think that's one aspect of this. Another piece that I kind of, and again, I think this kind of points a little bit to the mobile space, is that the security controls in the Windows environment grew out of basically, I think, bailing wire and Band-Aids in a sense. Whereas the notion of, and if you look at like the Linux environment or the Unix type environments, there was more of a security notion from the very roots. And if we look at Windows way back, it was a DOS operating system. It was intended for a single user, isolated from the network, except for maybe a modem dial-up. And so it didn't have the same kinds of threats. And then threats started to emerge, through floppy disks and things like that. And as time progressed, we started to have to build in, protections. And NT was like the big, trusted core kind of protection thing. And then multimedia kind of eroded that, I think, a little bit as well. So I think part of it has been finding that balance between security and not. Whereas with the mobile devices, they got to kind of start from a clean slate and say, let's build in some protections. The big piece being, if you get a clean app on there, it's not as big of a threat. You don't have disk drives connecting to them so often, so you have, I think, some better protections around a mobile device. That
I totally agree. I mean, I think, so once again, Damballa, we have a lot of network visibility. We see about 50% of North American mobile data traffic, and 99.9% of the malware we see on mobile data traffic is PCs tethered to a mobile device, you might imagine. And we see a little bit of Android malware, and we see almost no iOS malware based on our visibility. However, if you go to Eastern Europe, or if you go to Asia specifically, where these walled gardens, these app stores aren't enforced and prevalent, you see mobile malware growing like gangbusters, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so certainly the approach that with the app stores for the mobile has helped prevent bad apps from distributing, and distribution is a key part of a threat actor's economic business model for making money off malware, is they got to get it out there. And if you can't get it out there on enough mobile devices, you can't make money off. Well, in Asia you can, parts of Europe you can, because of the lack of the app stores, if you will. And I think that's definitely solving it. And I think, and I do think what's going to happen is, I mean, McAfee has a whitelisting solution, for example. I know because I acquired it when I was at McAfee. So I think that those things are happening, and I think that, so endpoint security is not going to go away. And I guess the way I would sum it up, and I'll leave it at, is I saw a CISO for one of the large financials recently talk at an event, and he said, hey, yeah, I know my antivirus isn't doing much, but I'm not going to be the first guy that's going to take AV off my machines and replace it with something else, because I don't want to be the guy that's in front of the congressional subcommittee saying, hey, why aren't you running AV, but everybody else is? One of those things. So it's
the auditors expect it.
Exactly.
So,
so there's a need for new investment in it. I think and the scenarios I think are important, or the roaming user is still very key. I know at my company, half our employees never get on our network, and you still need to secure their activities and their lives online. And I think that so there's a presence. There's still a need for endpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Another perspective, perhaps, or perhaps another trend. In an enterprise context. Now, I don't think this applies as well, or not as easily, in the consumer context, but the home. There is actually a relationship. But in any case, in enterprise context, they tend to be targeted by the advanced attackers, the advanced threats. And in that kind of environment, it's not so much necessarily depending on the endpoint for security, but putting something in place so that the analysts can evaluate where an advanced threat might be. And so what I mean by that is, if you can get one sample and then be able to search across an enterprise and see if there are other drop points that an advanced attacker has been able to access, it gives you an opportunity to do, and this is one of the things where I'm a big advocate of threat analysis. Well, partly because it's my job, but and that's as well. But partly because it's that passive perspective. It's that piece that the attackers can't see how well you're doing it or what you're doing specifically, presuming you protect that environment. And so by doing that, it's that wild card up your sleeve that you get to pull out, and the ability to go and basically peruse or use the enterprise environment as a means to help dig out the activities that may have been taking place. You're not depending on signatures as much, but have the opportunity to kind of dig through it.
But that's also still reactive. I mean,
it
they have to have done something.
It is very much reactive. There's no question about that. It's reactive, but it's a way to deal with threats in a still reactive sense, but more effectively than otherwise.
It's the flock of sheep, or a herd of sheep. I don't know what you call it, group of sheep, not a sheep herder. But it's a herd of sheep defense, which is safest place if you're in a flock of sheep. I like flock of sheep, sounds better. Is if you're in the middle of the flock, right? Because it's the sheep on the outside edge, they're going to get nabbed by a wolf. And of course, by the time the wolf nabs the sheep, the shepherd finds out about it, runs the wolf off. You lost one sheep, it saved the other 99, if you will. And that's how the security industry has been for a long time, which is we're going to sacrifice a couple sheep to protect the rest of the flock, if you will. And if you're part of the flock, that's great. If you're the sheep that got sacrificed, not so good. And I think that's where a lot of these things are, and we certainly need to find better ways to protect the sheep on the outside as well. So.
Yeah, very good analogy.
Yeah, no problem.